The hum of the engine was a dull throb against the hollow ache in my chest, a constant vibration that did little to drown out the silence within me. It had been 3 weeks. 3 weeks since I'd watched the life drain from her eyes, since the world had fractured into a million irreparable pieces around me. Every room in our old house, every street corner, every familiar scent was a fresh wound, a reminder of what was gone. I couldn't breathe there anymore. The air itself felt heavy with her absence, suffocating me, so I left. Packed a few boxes, sold the rest, and pointed my car north, towards a place I'd only ever seen in faded photographs, my grandmother's manor. A place she'd left to me, a final, unexpected inheritance from a woman I barely knew, a woman estranged from the family long before I was born. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a desolate canvas onto which I could paint a new, solitary existence, a place where her ghost wouldn't haunt every shadow, every quiet corner. It was a desperate gamble, born of grief and a profound need for escape. The further I drove, the denser the foliage became, the narrower the roads. The asphalt, once smooth and well-maintained, began to crack and crumble beneath my tires, swallowed by encroaching moss and tendrils of ivy. The last town had been a cluster of boarded-up storefronts and a gas station that smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and regret. I hadn't seen another car for over an hour. The sun, a fiery orange bruise on the horizon, bled into a bruised purple, then extinguished itself completely. Night fell like a shroud, thick and sudden. I could smell damp earth, the decaying leaves of ancient forests, and something else, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood or forgotten rain. My GPS, a normally reliable voice of reason, had been growing increasingly erratic. I was on a night drive on unfamiliar road, GPS lost signal. This wasn't just unfamiliar, it felt forgotten, a road swallowed by time. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my grip tight. The road ahead twisted, a serpentine path through the encroaching wilderness. My eyes strained, searching for any sign, any landmark. Nothing, my breath hitched. Was I truly lost? Or was this road simply leading me to precisely where I was meant to be, a destination so remote it existed outside the normal flow of the world? Then, through a sudden break in the trees, I saw it. A silhouette against the bruised velvet of the night sky, jagged and impossibly tall. The manor. It loomed, a monstrous skeletal hand reaching from the earth, its many gables and turrets like gnarled fingers. The driveway, barely visible, was a long, winding scar through overgrown weeds and rampant brambles. My tires crunched over loose gravel, the sound startlingly loud in the profound quiet. The house was larger than I'd imagined, even from the photos. Some panes were shattered, like missing teeth in a decaying skull. Ivy, thick as a man's arm, clung to the stone walls, its tendrils snaking into every crevice, threatening to reclaim the entire structure. A faint, earthy smell mixed with something else, something musty and sweet. Like dried flowers and old paper, wafted through the open window I'd forgotten to roll up. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that pressed down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. I sat there for a long moment, my hands still on the wheel, feeling the residual vibration of the engine slowly fade. This wasn't solace. This was something else entirely. With a deep, shaky breath, I pushed open the car door. I pulled my duffel bag from the back seat. Its weight a small comfort. I pushed it further. The hinges groaned, a long, drawn-out cry that echoed through the cavernous entrance hall. Moonlight, thin and watery, filtered through a stained glass window high above, casting fractured patterns of color onto the flagstone floor. This was a presence, a watchful, waiting quiet. It felt as though the very walls held their breath, listening. I found a light switch near the door, a heavy brass toggle, and flicked it. I fumbled for my phone. Its flashlight beam a weak, trembling finger in the immensity of the hall. It illuminated cobweb-draped chandeliers, shrouded furniture beneath yellowed sheets, and a grand, sweeping staircase that spiraled upwards into absolute blackness. My grandmother. What had she seen in this place? Why had she retreated here, severing all ties? A shiver, more profound this time, racked my body. It was the weight of generations pressing in on me. The house felt old, impossibly old. Not just in its construction, but in its very essence. It felt like it had witnessed things, absorbed them, and now held them captive within its crumbling walls. I took another step, my shoes scuffing on the floorboards, and a faint sound reached me. Not an echo of my own step, but something else. It wasn't distinct, not words, but a breath, a sigh right at the edge of hearing. I stopped, straining my ears, my heart thrumming against my ribs. Had I imagined it? Or was the house already beginning to speak? The hum of the engine had become a dull, meaningless drone, lost somewhere between the static of the radio and the hollow ache in my chest. 3 weeks. 3 weeks since I'd watched the light drain from her eyes, since the world had fractured into a million irreparable pieces. My compass, my anchor, gone. And now I was utterly, irrevocably lost. The GPS had flickered out an hour ago, a final, mocking gasp before its screen went dark, leaving me on a night drive on an unfamiliar road. GPS lost signal. Pines, thick and black, pressed in on either side, their branches clawing at the sliver of bruised sky visible above. The air grew heavy, damp, smelling of wet earth and something else, something cloying and ancient that prickled the back of my throat. Every turn of the wheel felt like a surrender, each mile a further descent into a place I didn't recognize, a place I wasn't sure I wanted to find. My hands clenched the steering wheel, gripped tight, a futile attempt to grip something solid in a world that had become fluid and terrifyingly unpredictable. My breath hitched, then a break in the trees. The manor. It sat on a rise, a monstrous skeletal hand reaching into the sky, its gables sharp teeth against the gloom. The gravel drive crunched under the tires, a harsh, solitary sound. The sudden quiet was deafening, a thick blanket woven from the chirping of unseen insects and the frantic thrum of my own pulse. A gust of wind, smelling of decay and damp earth, swept through the open car window, raising gooseflesh on my arms. It didn't look like a fresh start. It looked like an ending. The air inside was still, heavy with the scent of dust, mildew, and something metallic, like old pennies. I flipped a switch near the doorframe, but nothing happened. Of course. No power. I fumbled for my phone. Its weak flashlight beam a pathetic attempt against the gloom. To my left, an archway led into what must have been the parlor. Dust sheets, like ghostly shrouds, draped over hulking forms of furniture. I pulled one back, revealing the ornate, clawed foot of a heavy armchair. On a small, inlaid side table, beneath another sheet, I found it, a tarnished silver locket, its chain snapped. It was heavy, cool against my palm. I tried to pry it open, but it was sealed shut. Clasp rusted solid. Who had worn it? Why was it left here? My flashlight beam danced across the far wall where a grand piano stood, its keys yellowed and chipped. One of the high windows rattled faintly, a dry, papery sound as if an unseen hand were tapping at the pane. It was just the wind, I told myself, just the house settling. Old houses make noises. My grandmother had lived here for decades, alone. Of course it would be drafty. I moved through a dining room. Its long, polished table scarred and dull. The chairs were still pushed in, as if a dinner party had just concluded or was about to begin. I could almost hear the clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, but it was only the echo of my own footsteps. Upstairs, the air grew even heavier, thick with the scent of aged paper and something faintly floral, like dried potpourri gone sour. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, each step a declaration in the profound quiet. I found a bedroom that must have been my grandmother's. A four-poster bed, stripped bare, dominated the room. On a dresser, a small, lacquered box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were old photographs. I picked them up one by one. Sepia-toned faces stared back at me, unfamiliar and yet undeniably connected. My grandmother, younger, her features sharper, less softened by age, standing beside a stern-faced man I didn't recognize. One photo, though, caught my eye. Her eyes, though, were clear, and they seemed to bore directly into mine, a look of profound, almost desperate sadness. I flipped it over, nothing written on the back. Who was she? It sounded like a name or part of one, not mine. It was too indistinct to make out, a ghost of a sound. My heart gave a frantic beat. Just the wind, I repeated more firmly this time. The old house was full of drafts and creaks. I continued exploring, moving through a small, unused study. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents covered in fine dust. In a corner, tucked behind a heavy velvet curtain, I found it, a chest. The wood itself was cool, almost slick, beneath my fingertips despite the dry dust that coated it. A massive, ornate lock, black with age, secured the lid. I tugged at it, tried to force it, but it wouldn't budge. The iron was unyielding. What secrets did it hold? 3 weeks. My compass, my anchor. The sedan bucked over a pothole, jarring me. I gripped the wheel, gripped tight. The digital map on my phone had frozen hours ago, a useless bright rectangle in the gloom. Now the screen was blank, just a dead piece of glass in my hand. The road narrowed, asphalt giving way to cracked tarmac, then to gravel that crunched under the tires like skeletal bones. Trees, thick and gnarled, pressed in from both sides, their branches weaving a canopy so dense it swallowed the moon. Headlights carved a frantic tunnel through the oppressive black, revealing only what was directly in front of me, leaving the periphery to the shadows. A flicker, in the passenger seat, a pale, almost translucent hand resting on the dashboard, fingers long and delicate. My breath hitched. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding, gravel spitting. The hand vanished. The seat was empty. My vision blurred. It was nothing. Just the fatigue, the grief playing tricks. My eyes were burning, raw from unshed tears and lack of sleep. I pinched the bridge of my nose, forcing air into my lungs. This was it, the final descent into exhaustion-induced madness. The car idled roughly. I leaned forward, my forehead resting on the cool steering wheel. A faint scent like jasmine and old paper drifted from the passenger side, her scent. I inhaled deeply, desperately trying to capture it, hold on to it. It was so real, too real. I flinched, snapping upright. My head hit the roof with a dull thud. The air in the car felt suddenly heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. Nothing, there was nothing there. My hands trembled on the wheel. This wasn't just exhaustion. This was something else. My skin crawled. The hairs on my arms stood on end, prickling, but a shiver, deep and unsettling, snaked down my spine. I pressed the accelerator, eager to outrun the phantom presence, to reach the manor, to find some semblance of safety, however illusory. The gravel road continued, endless, unforgiving. Hours later, or what felt like them, the manor finally materialized out of the mist, a hulking silhouette against a sky that was beginning to bruise with dawn. The air was frigid, carrying the damp scent of ancient earth and decaying leaves. My muscles ached from the drive, my eyes gritty. I stumbled out of the car, my legs stiff, and stood on the overgrown drive, staring up at the house. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a mausoleum. Every creak of the old floorboards, every draft rustling a forgotten curtain made me jump. I needed to hear another voice, a living one. I found my phone miraculously. It had a bar of signal, a ghost of connection in this forgotten place. My fingers fumbled as I dialed a colleague, the one I'd always confided in, the one who'd called me pragmatic, grounded. The phone rang, then clicked. Hello. Colleague's voice was sharp, impatient. It's William, I managed, my voice hoarse. William, where are you? Haven't heard from you in weeks. A pause, you sound terrible. I'm at my grandmother's place, the one I inherited. Look, I know this sounds strange, but I think I'm seeing things, hearing things. I tried to keep my voice even, rational, but a tremor crept in. I saw her in the car, her hand, a traumatic loss. You're exhausted. Your mind is playing tricks on you. It's completely normal. No, this was different. It was real. It makes the impossible feel real. You need rest and maybe someone to talk to professionally. The implication hung heavy in the air that I was losing my grip. I'm fine, I snapped, bristling at the suggestion. I just needed to hear a familiar voice. Well, you heard it. Get some sleep. Call me when you're thinking straight. The line went dead, dismissed, rationalized. It was all in my head. They wasn't it. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak morning light filtering through the grimy windows. A large, ornate mirror, draped in a yellowed sheet, stood against one wall. I pulled the sheet away, revealing a tarnished, silvered surface. Then behind me in the reflection, a fleeting movement. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to ripple like heat rising from asphalt. I spun around, my heart racing, a dull, frantic drum. The room was empty. I looked back at the mirror. My reflection was still there, but something had changed. And there, just at the periphery of the reflection, a faint, almost invisible distortion in the air, a shimmering, like looking through ancient, flawed glass. Was it just the mirror, or was the room itself shifting just beyond my direct sight? I stood in the drawing room, the receiver's dial tone still echoing in the cold air long after I'd hung up. My colleague's voice, so calm and rational, had felt like a slap. It's all in your head, William. The words burrowed, a persistent itch behind my eyes, but the chill in this house, it wasn't a figment. It seeped into the very marrow of my bones, a damp, ancient cold that no amount of roaring fire could dispel. My gaze drifted across the ornate fireplace, up the peeling wallpaper, to the imposing portrait of my grandmother. Her eyes, even in faded oil, seemed to follow me, a knowing, almost pitying expression fixed on her stern face. I remembered her as a formidable woman, distant, but never truly unkind. Yet there was always an undercurrent, a tension in her presence, like a taut string about to snap. A draft snaked around my ankles, carrying the faint, sweet and sour scent of decay and something else, something metallic, like old pennies. I shivered, rubbing my arms. The house was a labyrinth of memories I didn't own. A stage set for a drama I was only just beginning to understand. The wood felt cool and smooth beneath my touch. Look closer. I ran my hand along the polished surface, then down the side, feeling for an imperfection, a seam. My nail caught on something, a slight ridge, almost imperceptible where the wood grain seemed to shift unnaturally. I pressed. A soft click. A narrow panel, no wider than my hand, swung inward with a faint groan of aged hinges. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light that pierced the gloom. Inside, nestled on a bed of brittle, yellowed silk, lay a small leather-bound book. Its cover was bare, unadorned, the leather cracked and dry. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a book. This was hers. I could feel it, the weight of generations, the unspoken secrets pressed between its pages. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The silk disintegrated into powder at my touch. I carried it to the drawing room's grand desk, pulling up a heavy, uncomfortable chair. The air felt thick, heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I opened the book. The pages were filled with my grandmother's spidery, looping script, faded ink on brittle paper. It wasn't a diary, not in the traditional sense. More like fragmented notes, observations, a dissent, not in my ears, not truly, but in the quiet places, behind the walls, beneath the floorboards. They coil. They slither, they promise. Asterisk, my eyes darted around the room. I could almost hear them now, a faint, murmuring chorus just beyond the edge of hearing, like a dream half-remembered. Another page further in, the pact, it binds us, a terrible inheritance. They demand their due. I see them in the mirror sometimes, just at the edge of my vision. Not reflections, no gaps, absence. The pact. What pact, my family? She wasn't just an eccentric recluse. He was a woman haunted, hunted. And what did she mean by they? I flipped through more pages. Dates were sporadic, some entries just a single frantic sentence. He tried to warn me, my father, said it was in the blood, not dreams, memories of others, their hunger. Asterisk, it calls to the grief, it feeds, it twists. My wife, her death. The words were a claw raking across my exposed grief. There was this house, this malevolent presence connected to my loss. Was it drawn to it? A sudden sharp crack echoed from the floorboards above me. I flinched, dropping the journal. It landed with a soft thud, pages splaying open. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. It wasn't just an old house settling. It felt deliberate, a response. I needed air. I needed to move. I snatched up the journal, stuffing it under my arm, and bolted for the front door, fumbling with the heavy bolt. I had to get out, even for a moment. To breathe, to think. I scrambled into my car, the engine sputtering to life with a reluctant cough. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay. I just drove, the tires crunching on the gravel drive, then humming on the narrow, unlit road. The road sign I passed was rusted, illegible. I knew I was heading away from any semblance of civilization, deeper into the wilderness. My phone, clutched in my hand, was useless. The screen glowed with a single stark message: GPS lost signal. The digital map was a blank gray expanse. No routes, no direction. The car headlights cut through the inky blackness, revealing only short stretches of asphalt before the gloom swallowed it whole again. The trees here were thicker, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sparse moonlight. And yet I could still hear it, the faint, insidious murmur. Were they truly in my head, or had I carried them out of the house with me? I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight. The road was a twisting ribbon of black, and I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. What had I stumbled into? And what did the pact truly mean for me, my wife, her death? It landed with a soft thud, pages splaying open on the worn rug. My breath hitched, a dry rasp in my throat. The sound from upstairs wasn't a settling timber or a creaking beam. It was too deliberate, too sharp. Like something heavy had been dropped, or perhaps something had stepped. I stood rigid, listening. The silence that followed was dense, suffocating, a blanket woven from old dust and forgotten screams. My scalp prickled. I bent, snatching the journal from the floor, clutching it to my chest like a shield. The paper felt cool against my palm. My gaze darted around the study, taking in the shadowy corners, the looming bookshelves. The air, already thick with the scent of aged paper and mildew, now carried a faint, metallic tang. Like old pennies left in the rain, this house, It was a maw, and I was standing right inside its teeth. I couldn't stay, not another second, not with that feeling of eyes on my back, of something breathing the same stale air. I needed distance. I needed to see the road, the indifferent glow of streetlights, the mundane reality of other lives, anything but this suffocating quiet. My legs felt stiff, reluctant to move, but I forced them. No distant city hum, no faint spill of urban light. Just the vast, inky blackness of the countryside, punctuated only by the skeletal silhouettes of ancient trees. I fumbled with the key, my fingers clumsy with a tremor I couldn't quite control. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut with a solid thump that offered a brief, false sense of security. The engine coughed to life, a rough rumble that vibrated through the steering wheel, and I backed out of the long, gravel drive, leaving the looming house behind. The journey began as a desperate escape, a headlong flight from the invisible weight pressing down on me. I gripped the wheel, gripped tight, pushing the car faster than I should have on the narrow, winding lanes. I had no real destination, just a way. After what felt like an hour, the roads grew narrower, less maintained. The asphalt gave way to cracked pavement, then to a rougher, unpaved track. This wasn't right. I checked the dashboard. The GPS, a reliable companion for years, displayed a blank screen, a stark message flashing, signal lost. My stomach clenched. I had been following it blindly, trusting the electronic voice, but now it was gone, just like that. Night drive on unfamiliar road, GPS lost signal. The trees here grew thick, their branches intertwining overhead, forming a dense canopy that swallowed the already faint moonlight. I was utterly lost. A sudden, sharp movement in my peripheral vision made me swerve. A flash of white. I slammed on the brakes, the tires squealing on the loose gravel. My body lurched forward against the seatbelt. Nothing. Then a sound, not from outside but from within the car. A soft, familiar hum, a lullaby, the one she used to sing. My breath caught. My hands, still clutching the steering wheel, began to tremble violently. I knew that tune, every note. It was hers. It was our tune. A form began to coalesce, shimmering into existence like heat rising from asphalt. It was her. Her hair, the exact shade of autumn leaves. Her delicate hand resting on the fabric of the seat. But it was wrong. Horribly, terribly wrong. Her skin, usually warm and soft, had the pallor of old parchment stretched taut over sharp angles. Her eyes, once pools of warm chocolate, were now wide, vacant orbs, the pupils blown out, reflecting nothing but the inky blackness outside the window. A thin, sickly smile pulled at her lips, stretching them too far, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp. And that sound, that lullaby, it was emanating from her, but it was distorted, a high, reedy whine, like a broken music box playing a loved melody. It wasn't comforting. It was a predator's purr. "William," the voice hissed, not with him familiar cadence, but with a dry, papery rasp that scraped against my eardrums. "You left me." My body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Her head tilted slowly, unnaturally far to one side, her neck making a soft, grinding sound like dry bones. Her hand, the one resting on the seat, twitched. Her fingers, elongated and bony, began to reach for me. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, a predatory grace. I could feel the frigid air radiating from them. Her eyes, those dead, black eyes fixed on mine, not with love, but with an ancient, consuming hunger. No, this wasn't her. This was a mockery, a twisted, hateful echo. My wife was gone. This was something else. Something that wore her skin like an ill-fitting garment. With a primal surge of adrenaline, I finally broke free of the paralysis. I yanked the gear stick into reverse, stomped on the accelerator. The tires shrieked, spitting gravel. The car lurched backward. I didn't look at the passenger seat. I couldn't. I just kept my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, watching the distorted image of the road disappear behind me. The car swerved wildly, bumping over unseen obstacles. I didn't stop until the car slammed into something solid, a tree. The impact jarred my teeth, sending a jolt of pain through my shoulder. My chest heaved, raw with the effort of breathing. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my hands into them, trying to erase the image. But it was burned there behind my eyelids. The dead eyes, the stretched smile, the reaching, bony fingers. Was it real? Had I truly seen her? Or was my mind finally fracturing under the relentless pressure of grief and this house's insidious influence? It had been too vivid, too specific. It had known exactly how to wound me. This wasn't just a haunting, this was a hunt, and I was the prey. But what did it want? Her fingers, gnarled and pale, twitched once, then curled slowly into a loose fist. The sound of her neck, that dry, grinding whisper, continued, a private symphony of decay in the silence of the car. My breath was still trapped somewhere behind my ribs, a cold knot of terror. I stared helpless at the profile of my dead wife, or what looked like her, twisted into something alien and wrong. Her head kept tilting, inch by agonizing inch, until her chin rested on her shoulder, facing directly away from me. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the image flickered. The grinding sound vanished. The figure was gone. The passenger seat was empty. My hands, locked white-knuckled on the steering wheel, began to tremble violently. My jaw ached. I sucked in a ragged, gasping breath, the air burning in my lungs, hot now too hot. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, then back to the seat. Nothing, only the faint, lingering scent of something metallic and cloying, like old pennies left in stagnant water. A profound disorientation washed over me, heavier than any fatigue. Had it been a hallucination, a waking nightmare born of grief and exhaustion? My mind, a frayed rope, struggled to grasp at any rational explanation, but there was none. I pressed the accelerator hard. The car lurched forward, tires spitting gravel. I needed to get away, to outrun whatever malevolent illusion my mind had conjured, or whatever truth it had shown me. The drive back to the manor was a blur of frantic speed and white-knuckled prayer. Sleep was an impossible luxury. My nerves were frayed wires, humming with a frantic energy. I needed answers, not explanations that would soothe, but truths that would cut. My grandmother's study, a room I'd mostly avoided since moving in, now called to me with an almost magnetic pull. It was a repository of forgotten things, a museum of her strange life. Dust motes danced in the anemic light, like microscopic phantoms. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, dried ink, and something else, something vaguely metallic, like the lingering scent in the car. I started with the shelves, running my fingers over the spines of leather-bound volumes. Most were obscure academic texts, philosophy, forgotten poetry, but then I found a small, unmarked section tucked away behind a row of dictionaries. Here, the books were different. Their covers were worn, some bound in what felt like animal hide, others with strange, almost alchemical symbols pressed into the leather. Their pages, brittle with age, cracked and flaked as I opened them. I ignored the titles, focused instead on the margins, on the handwritten notes, the underlined passages. I flipped through it, my eyes scanning for anything, any thread. And then I found it. It spoke of a thing that dwelled in the ancient woods surrounding the manor, not a beast of flesh and blood, but a presence that fed on memory, on grief, on the very fabric of identity. Others simply vanished. The book described the thing as having no form, only a hunger, an echo of forgotten voices, a song of sorrow that twisted the mind until reality itself became a malleable, terrifying lie. It preyed on the vulnerable, on those consumed by loss, drawing them into its chorus until they became part of its endless, echoing hunger. It all clicked into place with a horrifying finality. I moved to an old wooden chest in the corner, a heavy, iron-bound relic. It was unlocked. Inside, nestled amongst moth-eaten linens, were stacks of yellowed letters, brittle photographs, and a meticulously kept family tree. I unfolded the genealogical chart, my fingers tracing the elaborate lines, dates, names, and then I saw them, an alarming pattern, not just a few but dozens of names, scattered across generations, marked with small, almost imperceptible symbols. A faint, hand-drawn circle next to one name with a tiny, almost invisible V inside. Next to another, a small, faded asterisk. I cross-referenced these symbols with my grandmother's journals, which I found hidden beneath a false bottom in the chest. Each thread led back to this house, to these woods. And then I saw my own name, William, and next to it, a small, barely visible mark, identical to the asterisk. My grandmother had known, he had marked me. Was I already changed? Was I already consumed by the quiet madness? Or was I just the next in line? The archaic script had burned itself into my mind, a brand of terror. A thing, it said, not flesh, not blood, something that fed on memory, on grief, on identity. Those who went in. The unspoken ending of that sentence echoed louder than any scream. I had to leave. Now. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the car keys. The old engine coughed, then roared to life, a surprisingly comforting sound against the oppressive silence of the manor. I threw the gear into reverse, gravel crunching under the tires, and sped down the winding driveway, past the skeletal trees, past the rusted iron gates that seemed to clang shut in my peripheral vision, though I knew they were open. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My headlights cut through the thick, inky blackness that clung to the ancient woods. I pressed the accelerator, determined to put as much distance between myself and that house as possible. The GPS on my phone was supposed to guide me to the nearest town, a small dot on the map a good hour away. I watched the blue line on the screen, a promise of escape. Then the signal flickered, the blue line pixelated, a digital tremor, before vanishing entirely. Searching for GPS signal. A synthesized voice announced, calm and infuriatingly unconcerned. I cursed, slapping the dashboard. The road ahead was a winding tunnel of trees, their branches clawing at the sky. I knew this was a night drive on unfamiliar road, GPS lost signal. I kept driving, relying on instinct, on the faint hope that any road would lead me away. Minutes stretched into what felt like an hour, then two. The trees never seemed to thin, the road never straightened. Every curve looked identical to the last. A gnarled oak with a broken limb, a patch of tangled briars. I started recognizing them, or thought I did. My breath hitched. There was ice circling. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, white against the pale skin. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. A signpost, half-rotted, loomed suddenly in my headlights. The letters were faded, almost illegible, but one word stood out, painted in crude, blocky script. Manor. Foot slammed on the brake, tires squealing as the car skidded to a halt. The sign pointed down a narrow, overgrown lane I hadn't seen before. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum. I hadn't turned off the main road. I couldn't have. I was certain I hadn't, yet there it was, the lane, and at the end of it, a familiar looming silhouette against the bruised pre-dawn sky. The manor. I had driven for what felt like half the night, and somehow I was back. The front door, which I had definitely locked behind me, stood ajar, a gaping more in the facade of the house. I stumbled out of the car, my legs heavy, my mind reeling. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. My keys were still in the ignition. The engine was still running. I walked, a puppet on invisible strings, towards the open door. The air within was thick and still, heavy with dust and the scent of decay. I closed the door behind me, the latch clicking with an unnerving finality. Hello. My voice was a dry croak, swallowed by the vast emptiness of the foyer. No answer, only the drip, drip, drip of something from upstairs. I swore it had been on the left when I left. Now it was on the right. My perception was fraying. I tried the front door again. It was locked. The key was in my car, still in the ignition. I searched my pockets, frantic, nothing. I pulled harder on the ornate brass handle. It wouldn't budge. I was trapped. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud on the polished floorboards. I needed to find a window, any way out. The library, I thought, the French doors leading to the garden. I turned a corner, expecting the long hallway that led to the library. Instead, I found myself in the dining room, a cavernous space I hadn't entered since I arrived. The massive mahogany table was set for a feast, though dust lay thick on the empty plates. Where had the hallway gone? I backed away slowly, my breath catching in my throat. I spun around, disoriented. The door I had just entered through was no longer there. In its place was a solid wall of aged wallpaper, patterned with faded roses. My eyes burned. I pinched myself hard. The sharp pain was real. This wasn't a dream. Panic began to bubble, a hot, acrid taste in my mouth. I tried another direction, pushing through a heavy velvet curtain I didn't remember seeing before. It led into a narrow, winding corridor, completely unfamiliar. Her favorite flowers, my wife's. I staggered, leaning against the rough plaster wall. The scent was so vivid, so real, I could almost feel her presence beside me. My vision blurred. William, my head snapped up. No one was there. The corridor stretched on, impossibly long, the floorboards groaning underfoot as if the house itself was breathing. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing heavy, thick. Each step felt like wading through treacle. How long had I been walking? Minutes? Hours? The light from the distant window at the end of the corridor seemed to pulse, shifting from a pale gray dawn to a deep, bruised twilight and back again in the blink of an eye. Outside, the landscape was a blur, a swirling vortex of greens and browns, as if the very world beyond the glass was undecided. And behind my reflection, just for a fleeting moment, I saw another. Was it a trick of the light? A symptom of my unraveling mind? Or was something truly watching me from within the depths of this impossible house? A thing, it said. Those who went in, I had to leave, now. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the key, the cold metal biting into my skin. The old manor seemed to breathe around me, a living sarcophagus, its walls pressing in. Every shadow held a flicker of movement, every creak a whisper of my name. I burst from the front door, the night air a slap to my face. It was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something cloying and metallic like old blood. I didn't look back. The car door groaned open, and I threw myself inside, shoving the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, then caught, a blessedly familiar rumble. I slammed the shifter into reverse, tires spitting gravel as I tore down the winding lane, away from the looming silhouette of the house. The road was a black ribbon unspooling before me, swallowed almost immediately by the dense tree line. I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight, my jaw aching. I drove fast, desperate to put miles between myself and that place, that thing. The air in the car grew heavy, thick with my own ragged breaths. Then the first flicker. The GPS screen, which had been a comforting blue glow, sputtered. A jagged line of static replaced the familiar map. Recalculating, a synthetic voice chirped, then died. The screen went black. I cursed, hitting the dashboard. Nothing. Just the endless black outside and the faint, unsettling whine of the engine. The road narrowed, the trees closing in like skeletal fingers. Their branches scraped against the car, a dry, rasping sound that set my teeth on edge. Where was I going? I hadn't seen a single sign, a single streetlight, for what felt like an eternity. The road twisted, dipped, and climbed, each turn indistinguishable from the last. It was as if I was driving deeper into a labyrinth, not out of it. It was the clarity that began to bloom in my mind, a horrifying mosaic snapping into place. The journal, the fragments I'd read, the ones about the arrangement, the tithe, the chosen vessel, my grandmother, her strange knowing gaze, my wife, her sudden inexplicable illness, grief, identity, memory, the thing fed on those. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, the car shuddering. The landscape outside blurred, but the images inside my head sharpened. My ancestors, they hadn't just lived in that house, they had served it, or more accurately, they had served something through it. An ancient pact forged generations ago, not for power, not entirely. It was a bargain, a desperate measure to evade some other, unspeakable horror that had threatened them. A price was paid then, and a price was exacted still. The steering wheel felt slick under my palms. Cost was a sacrifice every few generations, a designated inheritor, someone to become the entity's anchor, a living conduit, a vessel. It wasn't just the house that had inherited me. I had inherited the house and its obligation. My hands began to shake uncontrollably. The car swerved, tires squealing on the loose gravel. I wrestled the wheel, correcting its course, but my vision swam. The faces of my family, from the faded portraits in the manor, flashed behind my eyes. Their eyes, distant, resigned, they knew, they had all known, and they had left it for me, not a thing from space, not a demon from hell, but something woven into reality itself, a parasitic resonance. It latched onto the threads of sorrow, of loss, of self. I was that bridge. I was the designated inheritor, not just a victim stumbling into a nightmare, but the chosen one. It was preparing me for what? To be devoured. A sharp turn, and the car lurched. The headlights momentarily caught something in the trees, a flicker of movement, too quick, too indistinct. My breath hitched. Was it already following me, or was it already inside? There was this desperate drive, just another part of the ritual, a final, futile attempt at escape before the consummation. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't running from the house. The destination was irrelevant. The journey itself was the trap. My wife, my grief, identity, they were not just bait. They were the very chains binding me to this fate. The road ahead remained an impenetrable wall of black. My foot was still on the gas, but I felt like I was moving through treacle. The engine's hum seemed to shift, growing deeper, almost guttural. It wasn't the sound of my car anymore. It was something else, something resonating from within me, from the very core of my being. Was there any escape from a legacy etched into my own blood? A thing, it said. Those who went in, I had to leave. Now, my hands trembled as I fumbled with the ancient lock on the study door. The cold metal bit into my palm. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the suffocating silence. I burst from the room, the door slamming behind me with a report that echoed through the empty house. I didn't spare it a glance. My focus was the front door, the solid oak barrier between me and the suffocating presence that clung to every threadbare tapestry and peeling wallpaper pattern. The heavy key turned with a grating groan. Cold air, sharp and clean, rushed in as I wrenched the door open. It smelled of damp earth and distant pine, a scent of freedom. I scrambled to my car, fumbling the key into the ignition. Gravel crunched under the tires as I reversed, spun the wheel, and floored the accelerator. The long driveway stretched ahead. A tunnel of swaying branches in the moonless night. Headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the familiar gnarled oaks that lined the path. I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight, my gaze fixed on the faint glow of the main road at the end. My chest loosened, just a fraction. This was it. I was getting out. I reached the rusted gates, long since jammed open, and turned sharply onto the narrow country lane. The tires hummed against the asphalt. Relief, a thin, fragile thing, began to unfurl in my gut. I glanced at the GPS on the dashboard. The blue line, my escape route, glowed steadily. Then a flicker. The screen glitched, displaying a garbled mess of pixels before snapping back to the map. A minor hiccup, I told myself. The signal out here was always spotty, but the road ahead seemed different. The trees lining the shoulders were denser, their branches more interwoven, creating a canopy that swallowed the faint starlight. Air in the car grew heavy, pressing against my eardrums. The GPS flickered again, longer this time. The blue line vanished. The entire map dissolved into a swirling kaleidoscope of colors before going blank. Night drive on unfamiliar road, GPS lost signal, a robotic voice announced, devoid of concern. My breath caught in my throat. I slammed a hand against the dashboard. Nothing, just the dead screen. I slowed, peering into the inky blackness beyond my headlights. The road should have been familiar by now. I should have recognized the old, leaning barn, the cluster of mailboxes, the sharp bend that led to the highway. But there was nothing. Just an endless tunnel of asphalt and the same impenetrable wall of trees. A prickle crawled up my spine. Had I missed a turn? No. I remembered the turn. I remembered the gravel spitting from under my tires as I hit the main road. I pushed the accelerator, trying to outrun the rising unease. The engine strained, the speedometer needle climbing, but the scenery remained unchanging. Then I saw it. A marker. A twisted oak, its trunk scarred by lightning, stood impossibly close to the road. I remembered passing it a few minutes ago. My stomach churned. I must have circled back. I gripped the wheel tighter, a tremor running through my arms. I forced myself to slow, to turn around. I would retrace my path, find the correct route. But as I executed the turn, the car seemed to resist, the steering wheel feeling strangely stiff, heavy. And then as I completed the turn, the twisted oak was there again, directly ahead. I had driven past it, turned, and somehow ended up before it once more. My perception warped. The road ahead seemed to stretch, then contract like a rubber band. The air grew thick, pressing in. My ears began to ring, a high, thin whine that vibrated deep in my skull. It wasn't just the woods anymore. The very road itself was wrong. It felt like a loop, a cruel, impossible Möbius strip designed to trap me. I floored the accelerator again, a desperate animal response. The car surged forward, tires shrieking. My vision blurred at the edges. The trees outside the window began to blur, not just from speed, but from something else. Their forms elongated, their branches stretching like skeletal fingers, reaching for me. Then, a sudden, jarring lurch. The car bucked violently, throwing me forward against the seatbelt. A sickening crunch echoed through the cabin. The windshield spiderwebbed instantly, a starburst of shattered glass. My head slammed against the headrest. The airbag didn't deploy. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. The strange visual distortions faded, leaving only the fractured view through the cracked windshield. My body ached, a dull throb in my skull, a sharp pain in my shoulder where the belt had dug in. I fumbled for the door handle, my hands slick with sweat. I stumbled from the wrecked car, my legs unsteady. The twisted oak, the one I had seen over and over, stood directly beside the crumpled hood. But it wasn't the only landmark. Directly in front of me, bathed in the faint glow of my dying headlights, stood the manor. I hadn't driven away. I had driven into it. My breath hitched. My chest tightened, a vice grip. I had been pulled back, violently. The entity's reach extended further than the manor walls, further than my desperate escape. It had twisted the very road, bent reality around me, and dragged me back to its threshold. My car, my only means of escape, was a mangled husk. A low, guttural sound escaped my throat. Not a scream, not a sob, something broken. I stared at the manor, its silhouette gaping more against the bruised night sky. I was battered, defeated, standing once more on the gravel drive. How far did its influence truly stretch? My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, the metallic jingle a jarring counterpoint to the panicked thrumming in my ears. The archaic script, the chilling revelation of a thing that fed on memory and identity, had ripped through the last thread of my composure. I had to leave. Now. I burst from the study, the heavy door slamming shut behind me with a sound like a distant gunshot. The grand hall, usually a cavern of shadows and echoes, felt like a gaping maw ready to swallow me whole. I didn't look back. My boots scraped on the polished wood as I half ran, half stumbled towards the front door, my breath catching in ragged gasps. I jammed the gear into reverse, tires spitting gravel as I peeled away from the manor. Headlights carved a frantic tunnel through the inky blackness. The house shrank in my rearview mirror, a monstrous silhouette against the faint glow of a moonless sky. I sped down the long, winding drive, past the skeletal trees, past the crumbling stone gates, and onto the main road. Or what I hoped was the main road. The asphalt stretched ahead, narrow and unfamiliar, hemmed in by a dense, suffocating forest. My phone, clutched in a white-knuckled grip, showed a blank screen. No signal, no way out. The trees pressed in, their branches like grasping claws against the sky. The air in the car grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something cloying and sickly sweet. Like decaying flowers. Was it coming from the forest or from inside the car? Inside me. I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight, forcing myself to focus on the road. The turns grew sharper, more frequent, each one leading deeper into the suffocating wilderness. They were everywhere, they were nowhere. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. Hours had passed, or minutes, I couldn't tell. Time had become a meaningless concept. A sudden, sharp turn brought me face to face with a familiar sight. The crumbling stone gates of the manor. My breath hitched. I'd circled back. I'd driven for what felt like an eternity, and yet I was here again. The house loomed, a predator that had patiently waited for its prey to exhaust itself. It hadn't let me leave. It never intended to. I cut the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, punctuated only by the frantic beat of my own heart. My hands were shaking, my whole body a live wire of raw nerves. This wasn't just a house. It was a cage, and I was the chosen occupant. It wasn't just haunting me, not just trying to drive me mad. It wanted more. It wanted to anchor itself, to manifest, using my grief, my essence, as its bridge into this world. I was meant to be its new host, its new voice in the chorale of echoes. This wasn't about escaping anymore. It was about fighting. I stumbled back into the house, the grand hall now a battleground. The air was thick with expectation, the very walls seeming to lean in, waiting. I found myself drawn back to the study, to the heavy, leather-bound journals. My fingers, still trembling, traced the ancient script. Now I wasn't looking for an escape route, but for a weapon, a countermeasure. I devoured the entries, my eyes scanning for any hint, any phrase that promised resistance. The previous owner, the unnamed ancestor, had known. He had fought. He had written about the binding, about the veil, about the offering. Not an offering to it, I realized with a jolt, but an offering against it. A sacrifice, yes, but not of life, of something else, something personal, something that could sever the link, disrupt its anchor. One passage, scribbled in a frantic hand, caught my eye. It spoke of a specific material, a mirror of the self, forged not of glass but of memory. It mentioned a particular time when the veil thins. The echoes are loudest. And a location, the heart of the house where the generations converge. The heart of the house, the forgotten chamber in the cellar, the place I'd always avoided. I closed the journal, the leather cool against my clammy hands. A desperate, dangerous plan began to form, coalescing from the fractured wisdom of the dead. I wasn't going to run. I was going to stand my ground. I was going to fight this thing, whatever it was. The house around me seemed to stir, its unseen inhabitants sensing my resolve. A low moan echoed from the floorboards above. The temperature in the study plummeted, raising gooseflesh on my arms. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of decay, like old, wet paper, filled my nostrils. It was pressing in, testing me, trying to break my focus. But I wouldn't let it, not now. I needed to find that mirror of the self. I needed to prepare the chamber. I needed to be ready for when the veil thinned. The question wasn't if it would work, but what would be left of me if it didn't. The journal lay open, its ancient pages brittle, a roadmap to damnation or salvation. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from the raw audacity of the plan. Stand my ground. The words echoed, a hollow clang in the forgotten chamber's damp air. Above me, the house groaned, a living thing in its death throes, but down here, in the heart of its rot, a strange quiet reigned. A false lull before the storm. I moved with a terrible, slow purpose. The instructions were cryptic, woven with arcane symbols and forgotten dialects, but the intent was clear: disrupt the chorus, sever the link. It spoke of resonant frequencies, of sympathetic vibrations, of a focal point that had to be shattered. I had gathered what I could: crude implements from the manor's dusty nooks, a tarnished silver bowl, chipped porcelain shards, dried herbs whose scents were sharp and alien. Each item felt heavy, imbued with a gravity beyond its physical weight. The first step was preparation. I followed the faded diagrams, arranging the objects in a precise circle on the grimy flagstones. The air grew heavy, thick, pressing in on my chest. It was like trying to breathe through a shroud. I could feel eyes on me, not human eyes, but something vast and ancient, stirring from its slumber. The presence was a vibration in my teeth, a hum in my bones. As I placed the final shard, a tremor ran through the floor. Not a structural shift, but a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated up my legs. They writhed on the walls, mimicking skeletal figures, then dissolving into abstract patterns that hurt my eyes to follow. Then the sound began. It was 1,000 voices speaking at once, all overlapping, none distinct, yet each one clawing at the edges of my hearing. It was the chorale. It was them. They were angry. My vision blurred. The forgotten chamber, the cold stones, the crude ritual circle, it all dissolved. Suddenly, I was behind the wheel of my car. The engine rumbled, a familiar, comforting growl, yet it felt alien. Rain lashed against the windshield, distorting the already winding, unfamiliar road ahead. The GPS, a small black rectangle on the dashboard, flashed lost signal. My breath hitched. How had I gotten here? The memory of the cellar was a receding tide, an impossible dream. My hands gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight. The road ahead was a tunnel of impenetrable black, punctuated only by the brief, terrifying flares of my headlights catching glimpses of ancient gnarled trees. The car was slowing, despite my foot pressing the accelerator. It was losing power. Panic seized me. I was stranded. Then the smell hit me. Not the damp, earthy scent of the cellar, nor the rain-soaked air of the road, but something sickly sweet, cloying like rotting lilies. My wife's favorite flowers. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the freezing air. It wasn't real. It couldn't be, but the scent of lilies lingered, choking me. I gripped the tarnished silver bowl. The journal had spoken of a counter-frequency, a discordant note to break the chorus. It was a desperate gamble. The sound was not a chime, but a shriek. A high, piercing wail that tore through the air. Vibrating through my skull, the room erupted. The walls rippled like water, the stone dissolving into a swirling vortex of color and memory. The sound, the sights, they were inside me. They were everywhere. The air itself tasted of rust and ozone. I could feel tendrils, unseen, intangible, reaching for me, trying to pull me apart, thread by thread. My resolve wavered. This wasn't a battle. This was an unmaking. I struck the bowl again, harder this time, ignoring the searing pain in my hand as the shard bit into my palm. The shriek intensified, a raw, primal scream that was both mine and theirs. The room pulsed, contracting and expanding, threatening to crush me. The floor tilted violently, the fractured wisdom of the dead. Was this what it meant to break them, to break myself? The chorus swelled, a deafening cacophony of agony and triumph. It was trying to consume me, to devour my memories, my very being. I could feel my thoughts fraying, my identity dissolving. Was I still William, or was I just another echo in their endless song? The engine coughed, a wet, rattling sound that vibrated through the steering wheel and up my arms. I gripped it tighter, gripped tight, as the old sedan lurched and died. The dash lights flickered, then extinguished, plunging the interior into a suffocating blackness. Outside, the night was absolute, a heavy velvet shroud drawn over an unfamiliar road. Moments before, the GPS had simply gone blank, its cheerful voice replaced by a flat electronic hum that quickly faded to nothing. Then the signal bars vanished. Now even the car itself had given up. A chill seeped in through the vents, carrying with it the damp, earthy smell of the woods that pressed in on either side. My breath plumed in the frigid air. I turned the key again, a desperate, futile grind of metal on metal. Nothing. The silence that followed was not empty, but thick, like something waiting to be unwrapped. I squinted into the gloom beyond the windshield. The road ahead was a faint ribbon, barely visible under the sliver of moon struggling through the cloud cover. No streetlights, no other cars, just the looming silhouettes of ancient trees, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. Had I even been driving in the right direction? My sense of north, south, east, west had dissolved with the GPS signal. I could have been anywhere, driving in circles for all I knew, the manor a distant, hateful memory, or perhaps just a few miles back lurking. I shook my head trying to dislodge it, but the sound intensified, growing into a low, guttural murmur. It wasn't language, not exactly, but a chorus of desperate, yearning tones, each one a thread in a tapestry of sorrow. It was the chorale. It was here. I reached for the door handle, but my hand trembled, refusing to obey. Air in the car grew heavy, pressing against my chest, making each breath a struggle. Then the lights began, not from the car, not from outside, but from the very air itself. Shifting, shimmering motes of impossible color, purples that defied the spectrum, greens that burned like acid, blues that swallowed light, began to coalesce just beyond the windshield. The trees outside, caught in their shifting glow, seemed to writhe, their bark twisting into tormented faces, their branches reaching. Grasping, I pressed myself against the seat, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't a manifestation in the manor, where the walls provided some warped comfort of familiarity. This was in the open, on an unfamiliar road, the world itself dissolving around me. The murmurs became distinct, not words but impressions, hungry, ancient, alone, and then a single piercing thought, clear as a bell in the screaming chorus. Yours, all yours. It was talking about my grief, my memories, the raw, gaping wound left by my wife's passing. It wanted them. It thrived on them. It was offering a twisted solace, a promise of absorption, of an end to the pain if only I would surrender. I felt a pull, a sickening magnetic force, drawing me towards the shimmering vortex of colors outside. My mind screamed no, but a part of me, the exhausted, broken part, yearned for release. No, I wouldn't give it that. I wouldn't let it consume her memory, not even for peace. I wouldn't become another devoured memory. My eyes fell on the small, tarnished silver locket I still wore beneath my shirt, the one with her faded photograph inside. This was what it wanted, not just the grief, but the source, the love that fueled it, the memory itself. The pact wasn't just about a host, it was about a sacrifice. A specific, potent sacrifice to sate its hunger, to keep it bound, to keep it from tearing the world apart. The others had given parts of themselves, their sanity, their will, but I had something more. I had the purest, most potent grief, bound to the most cherished memories. I fumbled with the clasp of the locket, my fingers numb. The air was thick with the entity's expectant hum, a vibrating anticipation that shook the car, not her. With a surge of desperate resolve, I ripped the locket from my neck. The chain snapped, stinging my skin. I held the cold metal in my palm, my gaze fixed on the photograph within. Her smile, her eyes, the gentle curve of her cheek. My entire world captured in that tiny, fading image. This was the core. This was the fuel. The chorale pulsed, a monstrous heart demanding its due. I could feel its tendrils, unseen, intangible, reaching for the locket, for the memory it represented. My hand tightened around the locket, my knuckles bone-white. This wasn't just a locket, it was a conduit. A symbol. I had to sever the connection, not just with the locket, but with what it represented to me, the source of my deepest grief, the very attachment that fed the entity. I lifted the locket, holding it before me, a tiny shield against the encroaching madness. The roar outside reached an unbearable crescendo, the colors flashing, blinding. A wave of ice and fire washed over me, searing my skin, freezing my bones. I felt a tearing sensation, not in my flesh, but in the very fabric of my mind, a violent ripping, like a page being torn from a book. The image of her face, so vibrant a moment ago, began to blur. Her smile wavered. The warmth I felt when I thought of her, the sharp stab of longing, the crushing weight of absence, it all began to fray, to unravel. It was excruciating, worse than any physical pain, a violation of my very soul. I was giving it what it craved, feeding it the memory, the feeling of her, the essence of my loss. I squeezed my eyes shut, a guttural cry tearing from my throat as the final threads of her image, her scent, her voice were violently wrenched from my mind. The roaring stopped. The heavy air lifted. I gasped, sucking in a ragged breath, my lungs burning. My hand was still clenched, but the locket was gone, vanished as if it had never been. I opened my eyes, but something was profoundly, terrifyingly different. I felt empty, the grief was gone. The love, too. All of it erased, I knew I had been married. I knew I had lost someone precious. The facts were there, etched into a distant corner of my intellect, but the emotional resonance, the aching, visceral connection was utterly absent. It was like reading a story about a stranger. A shudder ran through me, a belated tremor of horror. I had stopped the corail, I think, but what had I become in the process? The locket, cold and sharp-edged, tore free. The chain bit into my neck, leaving a thin, crimson line, but I barely registered the sting. My fingers clenched around the metal, the small photograph of her, her luminous smile, pressed hard into my palm. My entire world a fading image. This was it, the last thread. A shudder ripped through the air, not a vibration but a tearing sound like ancient fabric rending. The oppressive weight that had crushed me for weeks, the dense, suffocating presence of the house, suddenly snapped. It was a physical release, a sudden vacuum. My lungs burned, starved for air I hadn't realized was denied. I gasped, a ragged, desperate sound collapsing onto the splintered floorboards. Dust, fine as ash, billowed around me, coating my tongue, filling my nostrils with the scent of decay, and something else, something metallic and acrid like burnt ozone. The distant, distorted music, the chorale of echoes that had driven me to the brink, ceased. An absolute silence descended, deeper and more profound than any I had ever known. It was not peace. Now only the familiar patterns of water stains remained. Was it over? Had I truly severed the connection, broken the pact? The house stood, silent, unnervingly still. I pushed myself up, my limbs heavy, aching. My gaze swept across the room. The distortions in the walls, the twisting patterns that had marked my sanity, were gone. The wallpaper, peeling and faded, was merely old. The furniture, draped in dust sheets, was just furniture. It was as if the nightmare had been scrubbed away, leaving only the grim reality of a decaying manor. But the memory, the imprint of the horror, was burned onto my retinas, etched into my very soul. Could something so vast, so ancient, truly be banished by a simple act of defiance? I had to leave. The thought was a raw, primal urge, not a plan but a desperate flight. I didn't pack. I didn't look back. I stumbled down the overgrown path, the gravel crunching under my worn boots, the sound impassably loud. The car, a forgotten relic in the driveway, started with a reluctant cough, then settled into a low rumble. Its mechanical thrum was a comforting anchor in the vast, unsettling quiet. I drove. The air in the car grew heavy with the smell of damp earth and pine needles. I gripped the steering wheel, gripped tight, my gaze fixed on the asphalt rushing towards me. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every snap of a twig, made me flinch. I glanced at the dashboard. The GPS screen, which had been stubbornly blank for the last hour, suddenly flickered, a moment of hope. Then a stark white message bloomed across the black, signal lost. It hung there, marking an electronic epitaph to my attempt at escape. The digital voice, usually so calm and assured, was gone. I was truly adrift. The trees pressed closer, their branches forming a dense canopy overhead, swallowing the faint starlight. The road narrowed further, becoming a forgotten track, barely wide enough for the car. Was this road even leading anywhere? A new sensation began to creep in, subtle at first, then growing. It was a resonance, a low, almost imperceptible hum that vibrated deep in my bones. It felt familiar, yet utterly alien. I tried to dismiss it, a phantom ache from the ordeal, a nervous tremor. But it persisted, growing stronger, like a tuning fork struck deep inside my skull. Not from outside, not from the rustling leaves or the wind, but from within. A single, elongated tone, a note stretched thin, then another joining it. A harmony, faint and distant, yet undeniably present. It was the chorale, but how? I had broken the locket. I had severed the connection. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut for a terrifying moment, the car veering slightly before I forced them open, my gaze darting to the rearview mirror. My reflection stared back, but something else was there. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the depths of my pupils, a fleeting, multifaceted glint, like shattered glass reflecting an impassable light. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the familiar, haunted gaze of a man who had seen too much. But the hum, the resonance, continued. It was a thought, a knowing blooming in my mind, not my own, but utterly clear. The house was merely a vessel, a gathering place, a battery. My hands tightened on the wheel, my knuckles throbbing. They were not words, not language, but pure information, pure existence. And through them I understood. The locket had not banished it. It had merely changed its form. It had been released from the confines of the manor, and I, in my desperate act, had offered it a new, mobile sanctuary. The GPS screen still displayed its marking signal lost, but I no longer needed a signal. I felt a new sense of direction, a strange, undeniable pull towards, somewhere, a knowledge of things I shouldn't know. My grief, my memories of her, once so personal, now felt like echoes in a vast, shared space. It wasn't gone, it was just getting started, and I was its newest conductor. What new horrors would I now orchestrate?